The 2025 thematic report, Time to Care, What Helps Women Cope in Prison, by H.M., Chief Inspector of Prisons, reveals a profoundly troubling portrait of the state of women's prisons in England. It draws upon extensive survey data, field visits to 4 major prisons, Bronzefield, Eastwood Park, Foston Hall, and New Hall, and testimony from both inmates and staff to lay bare the inadequacy of current prison regimes in supporting some of the most vulnerable women in society. At the heart of the report is a damning statistic. Rates of self-harm among women in custody have risen dramatically over the past decade, from 1,545 to 5,624 incidents per 1,000 prisoners between 2013 and 2023. This 8-fold increase compared to male prisoners underscores an escalating crisis in the mental health and well-being of incarcerated women. Many of these women arrive in prison with histories of trauma, including childhood abuse, domestic violence, and care system involvement. Once inside, rather than finding a therapeutic environment, they are met with conditions that often exacerbate distress and trauma. A major theme running through the report is that basic elements of humane treatment are consistently overlooked, despite the acknowledged importance of family ties, ranked by inmates as the #1 factor helping them cope. Women are frequently imprisoned far from home, making visits from children and relatives difficult, expensive, and rare. Even when contact is technically possible, the facilities and procedures are often inadequate or mismanaged. Video calls are limited and poorly connected, visitors' centres are understaffed or shuttered, and there is a persistent lack of imagination in supporting relationships with children, such as helping mothers read stories to their children or attend parents' evenings remotely. Even more disheartening is the failure to offer women dignity in day-to-day life. Many women arrive at prison with few personal possessions and are forced to wear ill-fitting male-designed clothing. Access to underwear is limited, and inmates are not allowed to wash their undergarments in machines, resorting instead to washing them in small bowls in their cells, often the same bowls used for shaving or cleaning. These dehumanizing restrictions are emblematic of a broader lack of care and respect. Isolation is another recurring hardship. Women reported being locked in cells for long periods with little to no purposeful activity. Daily routines were frequently cut short without notice. Employment opportunities were limited, often dull and poorly paid. Many women said they had to choose between essentials like hygiene products or phone credit to call loved ones. Despite prisons being located on spacious grounds, access to fresh air and exercise was minimal and inconsistent. Mental health support is woefully insufficient, though 76% of incarcerated women report having mental health issues, far higher than the 51% among men. The therapeutic infrastructure within prisons is inadequate. Most frontline officers are inexperienced and lack training in trauma-informed care. Key work sessions, intended to create meaningful, one-on-one support relationships, are barely delivered, with some prisons completing fewer than 15% of their scheduled sessions. Officers often rotate between wings, undermining consistency and rapport building. While some sites like New Hall have prioritized effective key worker schemes and specialist training, these are exceptions. Equally alarming is the heavy reliance on punitive responses to mental health crises. Women in acute distress are often met not with compassion, but with force, segregation, or the use of anti-rip clothing, sometimes enforced through forcible strip searches. The report documents disturbing incidents of women being stripped naked and left sobbing in their cells, stripped of not just their clothing, but their dignity. Constant supervision, another supposed safeguarding measure, was described as invasive and traumatizing, particularly when conducted by male officers. Staff are not immune to the psychological toll of these failures. Many officers spoke candidly about feeling traumatized and desensitized to the frequent, often graphic episodes of self-harm they witness. Yet, support for staff mental health remains reactive and insufficient, largely limited to post-incident care and rarely focused on prevention or long-term resilience building. Only officers in specialist units such as PIPES psychologically informed planned environments receive ongoing clinical supervision. Peer support, a potentially powerful source of resilience and healing, is largely untapped. Informal networks among inmates provide emotional sustenance and advice, but formal peer roles are underdeveloped or unavailable. The listener scheme, where trained inmates offer confidential support to others, was either non-operational or significantly limited in 3 of the 4 prisons visited. While some isolated examples of good practice exist, such as the HOPE program, which teaches emotion regulation techniques, or charities like Together Women offering case-by-case support, these efforts are small-scale and under-resourced. Facilities like Bronzefield's Salon or Newhall's Family Support Units stand as beacons in a bleak landscape, but are too rare to meet the scale of need. Ultimately, the report does not just expose a crisis in individual prisons, it indicts the entire system of women's incarceration. It paints a picture of institutions fundamentally ill-equipped to provide care, connection, or rehabilitation. Prisons are filled with women who are often more in need of therapy, support, and community-based solutions than confinement. The system as it stands is punitive in its routines, inconsistent in its support, and profoundly indifferent to the lived experiences of the women it holds. If anything is to change, the report demands urgent action, not just rhetoric. It calls on national and local prison leaders to commit to meaningful reform, to train staff properly, to support peer networks, to prioritize contact with children and families, to improve prison conditions, and to reduce reliance on physical restraint and segregation. It is, above all, a call to recognize the humanity of women behind bars, and to care. The Time to Care thematic review by HM Chief Inspector of Prisons closes with a sobering reality. The current state of women's prisons in England is failing at its most basic mandate to protect, support, and rehabilitate those in its care. The evidence presented is not anecdotal or isolated, it is systematic, thorough, and damning. The conclusion that emerges is not simply that the system needs improvement, but that it requires a radical reimagining. The prisons examined are not functioning as places of safety or healing. Instead, they are amplifying trauma, institutionalizing indignity, and failing to meet the most fundamental physical and psychological needs of women, many of whom have histories marked by violence, neglect, abuse, and mental illness. The dramatic rise in self-harm, the reliance on physically and psychologically harmful interventions, and the persistent absence of meaningful activity and personal dignity all point to a structure that is not only ill-suited but actively harmful to many of the women it incarcerates. Despite these systemic failures, this review does not abandon hope. It identifies clear and achievable solutions, interventions that are not prohibitively expensive or conceptually radical, but rather grounded in basic principles of humanity, empathy, and justice. For example, the success of the HOPE program and the positive impact of stable key work relationships at Newhall show that where leadership prioritizes therapeutic engagement over control, the results are significantly better. Similarly, the emotional and practical benefits of maintaining family connections are repeatedly emphasized by prisoners themselves, yet prison procedures and infrastructure continue to make such contact a logistical challenge and an emotional minefield. What is particularly alarming is that many of the most damaging aspects of prison life for women are not consequences of deliberate cruelty, but of bureaucratic inertia and a lack of will or imagination. Women wearing oversized men's clothing, having no access to clean underwear, or being forbidden from using washing machines, all these things are avoidable. These are not complex problems of criminal justice policy. They are simple issues of decency, solvable through leadership, empathy, and common sense. The review makes it painfully clear that the mental health crisis in women's prisons is both a cause and a consequence of poor prison conditions. The overuse of restraint and anti-rip clothing, the constant supervision conducted without dignity, and the failure to provide therapeutic environments create a vicious cycle that re-traumatizes women and undermines the ability of staff to provide care. Moreover, staff themselves are left unsupported and unprepared for the emotional demands of the job, leading to burnout, desensitization, and poor morale, further weakening the system from within. If the system is to move forward, a dual investment is required, in the women who are imprisoned and in the officers who care for them. This includes mandatory trauma-informed training, meaningful clinical supervision for all staff, not just those in specialist units, and a reallocation of resources to improve regimes, daily routines, and therapeutic access. Equally important is a structural rethink of the very necessity of imprisonment for many of these women. With the vast majority serving short sentences or on remand for non-violent offences, there must be a renewed push for community-based alternatives that reduce the use of custody and allow women to maintain relationships, address their needs, and recover in supportive environments. Ultimately, this report is not just a critique, it is a challenge. It demands that prison leaders, policymakers, and society at large reckon with the uncomfortable truth that the prison system, as it currently stands, is not only ineffective, but deeply harmful to a population that is overwhelmingly vulnerable and in need of care. The recommendations made are not simply aspirational, they are essential. What remains to be seen is whether this challenge will be met with urgency and conviction, or whether these findings, like so many before, will be shelved in favour of superficial reforms. If the goal is truly to rehabilitate and not just to punish, then it is time not just to talk about care, but to make it the foundation of women's imprisonment before more lives are broken beyond repair.